Hi everyone, my name is Juppin Dillon. I just graduated from Enver Creek recently, and I'm also one of the founders of the Climate Clock. I'm one of the hosts for tonight.
And my name is Urshia Opal. I'm also just graduated from Enver Creek. I have founded the Climate Clock with Juppin, and I'm also part of Sustainability. Moving on, we're going to have Sebastian do a territorial acknowledgement first.
Hello, I'm Sebastian. I'm a member of Surrey for Future and president of Force of Nature Alliance. So I'd just like to acknowledge that while this meeting is taking place in a virtual space, that many, if not all of us, are coming to it from the traditional unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. Specifically, as many of us are coming to this meeting from the city of Surrey, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Semiahmoo, Katzie, Kwikwetlem, Kwantlen, Qayqayt and Tsawwassen peoples. We are living through a moment where the entire world seems to be talking about racial justice. So I'd just like to note that the long work of reconciliation is still very much in progress in Canada, to express my hope that we can keep that all in mind as we go forward in our work and our lives. As it was mentioned, I'll be doing some technical support for this Zoom meeting. So some announcements from that sort of element. Please keep yourself muted and your video off for the time being, unless you are one of our guests or our co-hosts. If you are going to be asking a question, as predetermined already, we'll ask that you turn on your video and your audio at that time. We have a lot of people in the Zoom room, so just to make sure that our hosts and guests' videos are visible to everybody, right? We can't have everybody's video up. I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that this Zoom meeting is being recorded. If you have any problems with any of the technical side of things, please feel free to message me through the chat function. I'm going to rename myself to Technical Help, so it'll be easier to find me in the chat window. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to our co-hosts.
Thank you, Sebastian. Just one more time to introduce ourselves in case anyone logged on late. I'm Juppin. I'm one of the co-hosts for tonight.
And I'm Urshia, the other co-host. So we also want to just acknowledge the organizations that helped us put together this event. So first of all, the Climate Clock, Force of Nature Alliance, for Kids, Spark Foundation, Surrey for Future, and Sustainable KSA.
Thank you all for joining us today for this Green Recovery Town Hall. We have 90 minutes together with 3 local representatives to discuss green recovery. We have Surrey City Councillor Stephen Pettigrew, MLA Jinny Sims of Surrey Panorama, and MP Ken Hardie of Fleetwood Port Kells today with us. We also want to let you know that the members of the media may be present in this session and that the session is being recorded. I'll briefly go over the format first. So we'll hear a brief introductory remarks from our 3 representatives, after which we'll hold a question and answer session with questions from our youth and community participants. If you have a question, you can post it in the chat. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll find a button you can click to open the chat. So I'll type something in there in a minute, and if you'd like to post something, you can also just say hello, where you're from, and something that's bringing you hope in these times. So I'll do that as Urshia talks a bit more about green recovery.
Yeah, so COVID-19 has basically given us a glimpse into what planetary crisis can and does look like. So we're all experiencing it differently, which is true of any crisis. We can't help and think about the climate crisis that are happening and those that are to come. We've all been through the smoky summers from wildfires, droughts, landslides in BC, and as we recover from COVID and as the economy recovers, how do we keep climate and the environment in mind? What does our future and future economy look like? How do we reduce emissions and how do we become more resilient? Thankfully, the provincial and federal governments are putting billions of dollars into economic recovery. How they spend this money is crucial, and it will really determine whether we're able to protect our planet and people from climate harm, pandemic harm, and economic harm. It's taking our situation as an opportunity, not leaving anyone behind, bringing everyone together and building or rebuilding parts of our economy and our society in a just, fair, ecological, sound way. We need to invest in healthcare. We could be building renewable energy products, doing so much more in retrofitting homes and buildings, and there's lots of ideas on the table. So we want to hear from the people on this call, especially people from Surrey, and we want to basically hear what your guys' ideas are. So most of today is going to be like kind of question and answer. If you're not from Surrey, please consider organizing your own green recovery hall, we also have a For Kids Guide A, so that'd be great for you guys to check out to organize something like this in your city.
Now we'll move on to some opening remarks from our representatives. I want to say a big thank you to our representatives for taking time out of their busy schedules and joining our town hall today. So first we'll hear from Stephen Pettigrew. Stephen is a longtime environmentalist activist and has served as a Surrey City Councillor since 2018. He is the chair of the city's Environmental Sustainability Advisory Committee, the body that has brought the recommendation to declare a climate emergency forward to City Council last year.
All right, there. Good evening to you. I'm just chuckling because you said everything I was going to say there, so I can just let's pass it on to the next person. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyways, yeah. So I'll just tell you a bit about myself. I'm at City Hall right now. I'm in my office. If I look that way, I live about 4 blocks west of here. I've lived in Metro Vancouver for 50 years. I gotta really figure out to look at these things. I've been in Surrey for 20 years. I live in Guildford right now. Married for 25 years. I have 2 adult sons. Was Blockwatch captain for 12 years and Strata Council for 12 years. We have 134 units in our complex. And I was really content. I was happy just staying home, minding my own business, you know, growing my peas and just, you know, really not going anywhere. I would actually stay at home for, you know, 3 or 4 days in a row and just, you know, not really go anywhere. And I was really happy and content. But then the road through Hawthorne happened, and that kind of motivated me into action. And that's where I met many of you. So sometimes it just takes something to shake you out of whatever your comfort zone and to take action. And just seeing the injustice that was being put upon the environment and the people stirred me into action there. So, and now I'm still fighting the battle here and trying to do what I can. I don't profess to be an expert at anything. I stumble and bumble my way through things, and I'm trying my best, and I'm learning. And every week and every month I improve, and I'll make mistakes. I'll make more mistakes, and I'm just a regular person like you folks. So I'm the chair of the Environment Committee, and I'll do that as long as that position every year that I wonder, am I going to be pulled from it? So I'm just thankful I'm still there. I was a director of Metro Vancouver for the Climate Action Committee, but apparently I did something wrong and I was pulled from that, but I still have some good friends there. Also, I'm a part of the Climate Caucus, which is a national organization of elected officials at the municipal level, great organization. And I was supposed to press my timer and I forgot, so I'm just going to finish off here. So I'm supposed to give my top thoughts here. And this has been a real time of reflection of people looking at their lives and looking at the environment. I know that COVID has affected people in many, many different ways, but we're just focusing on the environment right now. And we can see a shift can happen. We can actually shift away from the way we are going into a different way, into a green economy. So that's one of the main things that I want to focus on, is to actually help to make that shift happen. I believe that's important for our planet to occur. And also, again, in my office, looking out my window, that everyone should have a home. Everyone is entitled to have a safe home, somewhere warm over their place to sleep, food, these basic things that we need to support, that we should be providing. We are not, as a city, we are falling short on that. And also, everyone should feel safe and valued. You know, right from me as a councillor, I don't feel valued many times as my job because of interactions. And I know people in society, they don't feel safe sometimes and they don't feel valued, but everyone should be. So those are the 3 things that are important for me. My top thoughts is let's continue this momentum that we have shifting towards a green economy, and we should have safe homes and everyone has value. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on, we have Jinny Sims, who was elected as the MLA for Surrey Panorama in 2017 and served as Minister of Canada's Services. Prior to entering politics, Jinny worked as a high school teacher and became the president of the BC Teachers Federation in 2004. In 2011, Jinny was elected as a member of Parliament for Newton North Delta and served as a critic for international cooperation, critic for immigration, and critic for employment.
Your mic is still muted right now.
There you go. Am I unmuted now?
Yeah.
Oh, now you're good.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, that's great. First of all, let me say congratulations to those of you who have graduated this year. It's been a very unique year for all of you and for all of us. And I think COVID has thrown many challenges our way, but you guys have done it great, and you'll have some wonderful story to tell to your children and your grandchildren. But before I do get going, I do want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory. I am anyway on the Katzie, the Semiahmoo, and the Kwantlen. Little bit about myself. I always call myself a transnational. I was actually born in India. When I was 9, my family emigrated to England. So then I did my high school, elementary school, and university in England. So that's my second continent. And then after I became a teacher and Margaret Thatcher got elected in England, we headed out to Canada for a year or two. That was in '75. And we fell in love with Canada, and we decided to stay here and raise our kids. So both my kids, son and daughter, were born right here in Canada, one in Quebec, one here in BC. And I have 3 beautiful grandchildren, and I have 1 absolutely stunning great-granddaughter who I love dearly. So as you said, I was a teacher, and once a teacher, always a teacher. So what brought me into political activism? Well, one of the things I learned early is that you have to be at the table. Being off the table, yes, you can throw your darts and arrows, and I've done my share of those in the past. But if you want to bring about systemic change, you've got to create space at the table. And what brought me in this way were kids. Because if I'm teaching kids, I'm not teaching a subject. Anybody can teach a subject, but you're teaching the whole child. And you cannot teach a child that is hungry, that is experiencing racism, sexism, other gender issues. I could go on, poverty. I could go on with all the isms in the world. You cannot teach when a child is suffering from those without trying to tackle those. And the only way to tackle those is to get engaged. And that's what brought me into activism in the teaching profession. And I became the president, and later on to move into becoming a member of parliament, and now a member of the legislature. It's about that if we really want to bring about true change, we have to change systems. And recently with the Black Lives Matter, we've seen the impact of systemic racism on whole groups of people, and specifically the Black community. But we have the Indigenous community here. And I'm glad that Stephen started off with talking about COVID as well. What COVID-19 has shown us is really important. I think it's lessons we've talked about, but this is lessons we have lived. That the COVID virus did not differentiate between age, between race, between color, between geography. It was everywhere, and we had to have a coordinated plan with all of us tackling this together. I feel the same way about other isms that we need to address in society, whether it's racism, whether it's poverty, the class system, climate change. Once again, we have to do it in collaboration. Climate change, when you look at it through the lens of a pandemic. It does not recognize geographic areas. It doesn't say, because you're well off, we're not going to impact you. So the rain, the floods, and all the changes we're experiencing impact all of us around the globe. And I think I'm just about up to my 4 minutes.
Thank you. So finally, we'll hear from Ken Hardie. Ken is a broadcaster and former spokesperson for TransLink, where he helped launch the Compass program and ICBC. He was first elected to the House of Commons in 2015 and then re-elected in 2019.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to be here. I know it's hard to imagine, but I am a little bit older and have been around a little bit. And I remember the first entree I had into environmental issues was, I forget which class I was blowing off at UBC, but I went into the UBC library and I picked up a copy of a book called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. Some of you may have read it. If you haven't, I suggest it is a good book because it was an early look at environmental issues. The premise of the book was that the songbirds were dying. They weren't around anymore. And this was the day when DDT, an insecticide, became the focus of a lot of attention because it was basically causing birds or making birds unable to procreate. And through that and through any number of other things I've seen over time, various issues come up. I remember going down Kingsway in a bus on my way to Metrotown, and there's a big billboard there, and it said ecology. And it was written as you would see a definition of a word set out in a dictionary. And this would be in 1962, 63. And the billboard said, you better get to know this word because you're going to have to pay a lot of attention to it off in the future. And so here we are. As you mentioned, I was working on radio for many years with a little bit of television and freelance newspaper work. Went into public affairs first at ICBC for about 15 minutes at the Vancouver Police, but that's worth the whole book. And then of course at TransLink. When I left TransLink, I saw what was going on in Canada. You mentioned Jinny, Margaret Thatcher. Well, Margaret Thatcher and her buddy Ronald Reagan did some things that have led to the situations that we face today. They deregulated, they cut taxes. The idea was that if they cut taxes on big business would create jobs and it would all be good. And that's exactly what big business did. Only they didn't do it here, they did it in Asia, especially in China. So if you want to know why China has so much clout today, you can go back to the days of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And Canada's prime ministers, liberal and conservative alike, have all played this, what we call a neoliberal game. But the point is that we've been presented with an opportunity. About a year ago, a lot of chatter was going on about the Green New Deal. And I remember saying at the time that a New Deal wouldn't work at that time because employment was high. There were a lot of resources to dedicate to green initiatives. And a New Deal, of course, takes you back to the era of Franklin Roosevelt in the United States when the Great Depression was on and there were lots of people out of work and there was a need to do public infrastructure like roads and highways and schools and hospitals. Well, guess what? This is what the pandemic has presented us with now. We have the resources. We have the need to stimulate the economy as we come out of the pandemic. And I'd like to submit that rather than open up thousands of restaurants again and have a lot of people working on subsistence wages and precarious jobs, now is the time for government to step back in and start to lead a process where instead of building the roads and the schools and the hospitals, although we could use some schools and hospitals, we start planting trees. We start transitioning Alberta's economy away from extraction. There's a lot we can do, and my time is up. There you go.
Thank you. Moving on, we're gonna basically go to our youth questions panel. So a number of our youth organizers have questions that we feel like a lot of other people have on their minds. So we're just gonna jump into those right now.
We're gonna start with Linton's question.
All right. Hi, everyone. Like they said, my name's Linton, and I'm with Surrey for Future. And so this question tackles, excuse me, a crucial issue to creating a just recovery, and is directed towards Ken Hardie and Jinny Sims. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, the efficiency of private long-term care homes has been exposed as inadequate at best and deadly at worst. In Ontario, the military wrote a report citing that some long-term care homes had cockroaches, flies, residents being bullied, drugged, improperly fed, and often left for days on end in soiled beds. Here in British Columbia, the Fraser Health Authority had to step in to provide assistance to senior care home in Langley and Port Coquitlam. According to the the Toronto Star, 82% of Canada's deaths have been in senior care homes. The pot banging and the applauses are great, but how do we move forward with concrete change to help our care workers provide better care for our seniors?
Go ahead, Jinny. You can go first.
Okay, thank you. No, and I want to thank you for this very thoughtful question that you have put forward today. And it's one that has kept me awake for a long, long time. My mother was in a nursing home right here in Fraser Health for the last 9 months. And she was 95. And she actually died during COVID. It isn't that she had COVID, but she died during that period. And my heart goes out to all the families who lost their loved ones during this period because you could not even grieve in a normal way. And not even being able to see them right now is very, very painful for many, many families. I think our healthcare system does need to be tuned up, and we need to start paying more attention to the care of our seniors. They are the ones who built this country. And it has been staggering, the numbers we have seen across the country. And the past few months have been very, very difficult. But what we do need is to make sure that we do have the resources there. And one of the first things we did when we formed government was to undo legislation that had been brought forward by the previous government that actually took away rights from the healthcare workers, a lot of whom worked in long-term care, both private and public. And what happened as a result was those people who made a decent living wage suddenly found themselves on a minimum wage, and their contract could be flipped from one name to another, and often maybe with the same group of friends. And so what would happen is they would go back to that minimum wage again. And at the beginning, it was around $8, $9, and it was just not good. So one of the first things Minister Dix did when we became government was to overturn that legislation. The other thing we started on before the pandemic was to move towards single site shifts, so that long-term care workers weren't working 5 hours in one facility, 3 hours in another, and 2 hours in another. And that's one of the things we did find this time is in provinces where there was a lot of that transition, that's where the COVID spread happened very, very rapidly. Now, we still have a lot of things to do when it comes to senior care. We have taken over some of the private centers, as you know, private nursing homes. And I'm certainly looking forward to the work Minister Dix is going to be doing this to carry it along. So for me, there are 3 aspects of this. One is we have to make sure that workers are treated with respect. And respect is not just wages, it's their working conditions, and it's also the way they are able to negotiate for themselves. So that's really critical. The most critical is we want to make sure that our seniors get the care they need, whether they are in a home, a nursing home, or whether they are getting care at home. So we have to make sure, once again, all of those workers are covered by Fraser Health. And as you know, we've moved towards a model of home care workers being covered by the health authorities, especially here in the Lower Mainland. But we have so much more to do. And I could probably talk about this topic for a very long time from personal experience, but it would be remiss of me if I didn't finish off by saying, and I'm saying this from the bottom of my heart, a huge shout out to the healthcare workers who look after our seniors. This is before the pandemic, because I used to visit my mom, and I can tell you the kind of care she received was absolutely awesome and amazing. And also during this pandemic, many of them put themselves at risk to go in and take care of our parents and grandparents. So a big thank you. And we as governments, both levels of government, have a huge responsibility to make sure that we do right by our seniors. And I do want to do a shout out to the federal government as well for stepping in the way they did. They didn't get into, this is not our jurisdiction. They actually stepped in, and kudos to the federal government for sending in the military where needed, but also, let me tell you, for the financial supports they provided to up the salaries.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jinny. That's a nice handoff. Thank you. And I have to return the compliment, because if you look across Canada, British Columbia has done probably among the best jobs, especially in the larger populations and jurisdictions, of regulating the industry. It wasn't just taking over some facilities in the Fraser Valley. I think there were some in the Kootenays as well. We counted on British Columbia to have strong regulations and to enforce them, and they have not let the federal government down in that respect. You know, limiting workers to one location is good, because you stop the spread. But this business, and it's not just in the long-term care or the seniors facilities, so many people are working part-time. And they're flipping from job to job simply because they can't get a full-time job that pays benefits, because the people running the businesses don't want to pay benefits. And that's, I was going to use a technical expression, but I get kicked off here. That's not good. We'll just say that. Proper pay with benefits. Give people not just enough to get by, but a decent living wage, and let them commit themselves to the care, especially of our most vulnerable people. We did come in with additional money to help top up the wages of healthcare workers, because what we saw, especially in Ontario and Quebec, is that the workers in these facilities were abandoning their jobs. They were leaving, and there was nobody there to look after these people, which is why we sent the military in to help out. There needs to be some national standards. We've been talking to the Prime Minister about this, and it's absolutely necessary. I think that we could probably look at British Columbia and model the rest of the country after what's been done here. Inevitably though, folks, it's all going to come down to money, okay? Because not only do we need to pay people well, there's some old facilities with 4 or more people in a ward. Almost impossible to control a situation like the pandemic that we have. So there's a lot of investments that haven't been made. We see as the federal government some opportunities through the existing infrastructure funding that we have allocated over the next 10 years to do more to improve the facilities or build some new ones, and working with the provinces to come up with the financial means to take these facilities out of the hands of private sector accountants and put them in the hands of people who really care about the people who live in these facilities, and to make sure that they've got what they need.
Can I pipe in? Even though I wasn't asked?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so as you well determined, this is a provincial federal matter, but just a couple of ideas to think about. And one is, I'm not faulting anybody. This is just part of the way things are. But I was really curious, why are we seeing these problems on the street? So one of the challenges I see is a continuity of ideas flowing when there's a government change. For example, again, I'm not faulting anybody. This happened numerous times back and forth. But there was an Auditor General's report that was created by the Liberals when they were in office, and it was a complete report ready to go, and I think it had 12 or 18 points on it, and that would have addressed and plugged the holes. That was the major problem, was the holes in the communication in the healthcare system. And then again, no fingers pointing, but then there was a government change, and that report was kind of axed, and a new report came into place. So I don't know how this would work, but if somehow there'd be some sort of continuity, because then that 4 years is kind of lost, and now we're into another 3 or 4 years, and will that be implemented in time? So that's just one thing to think about, if they could somehow have those going through. Another idea would be to, I don't believe this is done, but to add a worker representation to the Fraser Health Emergency Operations Center. So I don't believe that is done right now. So if it has been done, so be it. But if not, I think that'd be a good thing to have worker representation on the EOC for Fraser Health to represent the needs of the workers and what they see from their perspective. And then from a city perspective, what I think would be useful is that the city is doing quite well for supplies right now. And to make some of our resources available to cover the shortfalls. If there's some centers that are not able to procure various items that the city can somehow make that available. I'll probably stop there because I don't want to get myself into more trouble. But anyway, just a couple of ideas to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we'll move on to the next question, which is coming from Como.
Hi there. My name is Como. I'm here on behalf of SPARK Foundation. Our question is, why does the green recovery matter to citizens of Surrey, and how can they get involved? And how is our city equipped to help? And then what are some gaps that you as a community leader have noticed, and what are you doing to fill those gaps?
I wasn't able to hear that. I'm sorry. Could someone repeat that? And who's addressed to?
Sorry, this question was addressed to Jenny and Ken. I'll repeat the question. So why does the green recovery matter to citizens of Surrey, and how can they get involved? How is our city equipped to help, and what are some gaps you as a community leader have noticed, and what are you doing to fill those gaps?
And I think this one is actually for Mr. Stephen Pettigrew.
For some reason, it's really, really faint, and I can only hear every second or third word. I don't know if you can speak closer to the mic, or if someone else can summarize the question.
I just sent it to you on the chat, so you can actually.
Oh, great, now I gotta find this chat. Hang on a second. Okay, there it is. Oh, there you go. Okay. So why does the green recovery matter to the citizens of Surrey? Well, I would hope it does matter. Frankly, I'd like to see more concern from the citizens of Surrey. I keep harping at this council meeting after council meeting about our cities being taken apart tree by tree. So I do receive emails from the people of the city. I would like to see more to show that they really, this is a concern for them. And as far as being involved, there's several ways that people can be involved, and that would be to get involved with one of the environmental organizations. So there's some really good ones that we have. Liz Walker, we've got the president, and I know she's online here, the South Surrey White Rock Naturalist. Hope I got the name. I'm gonna probably get the names wrong here. Allison, Surrey for Future, Deb Jack, Surrey Environmental Partners. So there's various organizations within the city that focus on different areas. So if you're in a certain area, then you'd be able to join the environmental organization of that. And if you can't find one, just contact me at City Hall and I'll put you in contact with them. Some of them are mentioned on our website, but that'd be a way for people to get involved. Or you could virtually attend our environmental meeting on the last Wednesday of the month. The next one is on July 29th at 6 o'clock. You can join that and meet some of the other environmental leaders of the city and be connected there. So that is one way to be involved. And how is our city equipped to help? So right now, staff is working. We have numerous policies in place and things that staff are working on. For example, the council declared a climate emergency of last fall. And so that is being embedded into certain city documents. So that is one way. So I'm not quite sure how is our city equipped to help. So how is our city equipped to help people? I'm not quite getting that question there. Maybe I'll just change the question. How is our city dealing with this? How about that? So our city is governed by different policies. And we have, for example, the biodiversity conservation strategy, the natural areas policy, these different policies that govern how we function within the city and how staff works. And so these are important things to look at. And we're doing that through the environmental committee right now. We're evaluating these, giving suggestions to staff, bringing forth suggestions to council And it'd be great to hear from the different environmental groups. Many of them have already been involved, but if people have ideas, you can make your ideas known, and hopefully we can get your ideas incorporated into the different policies. So that's the key to making our things. I sort of look on this from a councillor level. There's sort of, everything's very militaristic here in the city. And it's all talks about battles and strategy and those sorts of things. But the council level, or the council meetings, that's when we have individual applications. And if you ever watch those, you know, we're kind of losing application after application as far as our tree canopies being reduced, reduction of our green space, those sorts of things. So what the key to make these things work is to go after the policy, to change the policy at a high level. And that is what needs to be done. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what staff is working on. So that is how staff is working through that. And that's how we in the environment community are trying to work with staff to be able to make that happen. And of course, all of it's educating people, educating various council members, and we're all learning. And the gaps that I'm noticing. Okay, so the biggest gap, the biggest challenge is that people are tired. I've been talking to many of these people, and they've been at this now for 20, 30 years, and they're just becoming worn out. They've been fighting this battle, and they're just, so this is where you young people, you need to, this is why it's exciting to see you're involved, is because this is very synergistic. They have, you know, 20, 30 years of experience of learning these things, but they're kind of getting a bit worn out. And rightly so. I've only been doing this for a year and a half. I'm already burnt out. And then there's young people full of energy and you know, full of vision. And so this is what really needs to happen, is that these two groups need to merge together and work together to be able to strengthen and to encourage each other. And what am I doing to help that? Well, this is part of it tonight. I've been working with Surrey for Future, working with Surrey Environmental Partners, trying to incorporate that. I've been still trying to work with the sustainability teams. I've still haven't been able to connect with them properly. But that's what I'm trying to do, is to be able to fill those gaps as far as connecting people together. We've got, you know, the people that are doing this for 30 years and people just been doing this for a few years. And you need to come together under one banner, working together, attending each other's meetings. And then once that's done, that'll empower everybody, and you'll get the idea and the energy, and everybody will catch vision of that. So yeah, no, that's my best answer I can give to that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And what I want to say on this is that it's encouraging for me that that question got asked, because I think we need to ask it more often. And one of the things I've noticed is that it is an issue here in Surrey. Whenever I visit a high school or elementary school, it's one of the first questions I will get asked, besides about poverty and social justice issues, is about climate change. And I think the conversation has to be framed in such a way that climate change is not just about one region or another, or about one culture or another. Every one of us needs to be a participant in many different ways. And we need to take some pride in some of the things that already have happened in Surrey that are sort of cutting edge, so to speak. Our fuel center, and the fact that the fuel that's generated from there is the fuel that is used to drive some of the trucks and the Surrey city vehicles around. If one thing the pandemic should have taught us, and though we should have known this all along, I think kids do, is that acting locally and thinking locally are really, really important. Because it's only when we can start taking actions locally that are designed to the areas we live in, that we can give real meaning to what we have to do to fight climate change. We can all sit around and discuss big ideas ad nauseum. There are lots of people who do that, and I love them for it. But until communities start getting engaged at all different levels of government, until the community groups get engaged, and until individuals get engaged, all the policies in the world are not going to help. I think for me, some of the best teachers for me when it comes to climate change have been my kids. I don't mean the kids I gave birth to, I mean the kids I have taught over the years. And the fact that you are here today to raise this issue and ask these questions. Surrey of City, do we have a lot more to do here? Absolutely, and I look to the City Council. But I'm also very, very proud of the assistance that is available from the provincial level through Clean BC, which starts off with some simple things like retrofitting some buildings. How is it that we are going to take those concrete actions to reduce the emissions? Not just having a number out there and not taking a look at that. And I'm proud of the work that the Green Party and our party did together to come up with a Clean BC plan that has realistic and really meaningful targets. I'm a great believer in setting targets for things. I like to set targets for myself as well, even in my daily life with the different things I do, because then I think it forces us to go towards that. And I think one of the key things we need right now is some active community engagement, and this is a great example of it, because the pandemic has given us a prime time, I would say. I don't think we've had a time like this. I think this is the pivotal turning point to take climate change head on and not see it as the purview of one political party or one group, whether it's the aged or whether it's the upcoming young. This is the time to see it as something that affects each and every one of us, and every one of us had better find a way to fight climate change.
Yeah, I'd like to just add a couple of notes. One of the things that British Columbia has had as an advantage for a very long time is regional land use planning. In other words, what's the land being used for? And one of the things that's been very important is the agricultural land reserve, which means that you're not going to be building some of these anthill condo developments or townhouse developments on arable land. But we need to, you know, we really need to pay a lot closer attention to what the city is doing. There have been, and I'll be very, very candid and blunt here, there's been so many inferences over the years that the developers are running this city and they get their own way. And you get, you know, what's happening not far from my place here in that big mobile home park, where they're taking out, you know, probably 200 families and they're going to put in 600 or something like that. I mean, this is not right. It's not healthy for people, and it's certainly not healthy for our environment. So we've got to protect the ALR and don't let the developers keep nibbling away at the farmland. We have to keep an eye on city zoning. You know, the city is approving these developments and not enough people are paying attention. And somebody has to, pardon my expression, raise a little hell when we start cramming more and more people into a given spot and not have the infrastructure to keep up, like schools and libraries and roadways and transit. We need to also make it personal. You see a piece of litter on the street, pick it up. Pick it up, do your own part. Take your bottles back and get a few pennies at the bottle exchange. One of the things that I did, and I was very happy to do this as my role as a member of parliament, is I signed off on funding for the City of Surrey's Surrey Natural Areas Partnership, SNAP. And these people are out there working to rehabilitate land that's been, you know, denaturalized and make it back into its natural state again. But we could use 10 times the effort that's going in there. So make it personal, keep an eye on the city, hold them to account for some of these decisions they're making, and let's see if we can get smart growth really happening here.
Thank you for our representatives for their passion and sincerity on that last question. I just want to put out a reminder that we do only have about 10 minutes. We're a little bit behind schedule and we have 3 more youth questions. So the next one is going to be coming from Urshia.
Yeah, so this one is directly for Mr. Stephen Pettigrew and Mr. Ken Hardie. So my question is based around climate emergencies. So how can the climate emergency initiatives and policies tie into fulfilling the needs of First Nations peoples and support racial justice?
I'll start. The best way that we can support First Nations in dealing with climate emergencies and dealing with the rehabilitation of lost habitat, et cetera, is to actually turn it over to them to do. I sit on the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, and so often we've heard, when we look at various stocks of fish up and down the West Coast, that the people who've lived on the land for millennia know a heck of a lot more than the scientists at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans about what's going on and what it's going to take to make things work better. So it isn't just a matter of, throwing a bone to our First Nations communities and say, well, here, we'll put you to work, doing this, that, or the other. Let them own it. They used to, and they can do a better job at it than we have.
Thank you. So when I just stop and look off into space, I'm just really thinking heavily. So I think the main thing that we need here is communication. So, if we're empowering people, First Nations or climate emergency, whatever we're talking about, it comes down to groups of people getting together and talking and discussing the issue and any concerns they have and how they can be empowered, how they can be involved. This is the key thing to answer this question and for many other questions. And this is what needs to be done. I feel this is not being done right now. I feel in the city of Surrey that these type of discussions are not happening. We used to get together about a year ago. We were meeting with we had council meetings with Semiahmoo First Nation. We would meet with the school board. We get together and we would have these type of discussions, real powerful discussions talking about these type of issues, and all of that stopped. And so that's what needs to happen right now, is that we need to get the dialogue going again. We need to have these discussions going. So to empower any group of people or to deal with any situation, we need to have people at the table. People need to be represented. They need to be able to have the different stakeholders involved. And so this is my big concern right now, that this is not being done. So hopefully this will start to happen again, and then we can empower all sorts of groups of people, because right now this sort of thing is happening with other groups of people as well. I've got at least 4 major groups of people right now that are dissatisfied with things happening in the city. And it all comes down to communication, and there is none. They're just being ignored. And so, yeah, so we need sit down, talk about it. Let's have a discussion back and forth and come to some sort of consensus about things. So that's how I deal with that one.
Okay, thank you. And our next,
if I could add briefly, yeah. I think here we've got to turn the paradigm around. Instead of what can we do to support the First Nations and our Indigenous communities, it's really about how can we work in partnership. And what I found when I was in Haida, that the way that the First Nations communities there are managing the resources is a model for all of us. So I think sometimes we need to sit back and learn. And I'm very proud that we were the first government in Canada to pass the legislation in order to give the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act that was passed to give us that grounding. So we start working nation to nation to protect Mother Earth.
Great. So our next question is from Riley. Riley, if you'd want to come on and just say your question.
Hi. I'm with the Surrey for Future group, and this is my question. Since the pollution has gone down with people not commuting to go to work, are there things that the government can do to support people's choice to work from home, and can this help meet our climate goals?
I'll take a stab at it. So ideally, what we want to do is we want to be able to have an environment or a situation where people can work in a community. Everybody seems to know that. You can live in a community, you can go and you can socialize there, you can work there. And this comes down at a city level to our neighborhood concept plans or our town center plans. And so staff works very, very hard over a period of years with the different community groups to develop these plans to be able to have this community built, that everything is kind of contained in there. And if that were to actually happen, then I think that would address what you're talking about, that it would reduce the pollution and traffic but unfortunately what's happening is, since I've been here anyways, is that many times these plans are not being followed. There all these different applications come forth and people want to make changes to them, and just instead of putting a business, they want to put a house in, or instead of put a house, they want to put a business in, or they want to make it much larger. So this is a problem that I see, that we need to stick with the original plans. And if the plan is old, if it's wrong, then freeze development on that area, put a new plan in place and work with that. But I think that's the way that we need to deal with it. If we can have these communities, I know in Guildford, where I live, it's really exciting to see, because all these people are out walking now, and we're actually getting to know each other, and we're waving and we're recognizing people, and because we're focusing on our areas. So I think that's something that we can do. I know the planners are working on it, but as a council, we need to make sure that I feel that we, many times we don't follow the plan enough. And I've said that before. So that's the way that I think needs to be dealt with.
I think that we need to do planning, city planning, so that we're building communities, as Stephen was saying, that are sort of, that the interdependency is right there. So you can walk to your doctors, you can walk to your grocery stores. And then we have a really good and effective public transit system to move people. I think for some people, working at home was absolutely perfect for the kind of job they did. But I can tell you, even though I was forced to work from home, I found it much easier once I could actually leave the home and go outside. Because when you're in the home, there are so many other pressures that are on people as well. And there is something to be said about a group thinking and creativity that occurs when you are with other people. But I really am a firm believer in cities doing their part to make sure that communities are built instead of housing is built. Because if you just build rows and rows of housing, which I see in the area that I represent in Surrey Panorama, with very few services in some of those areas, and next to nil in the way of public transit, what you see then is a gridlock where it can take me longer to go from Surrey Panorama to Surrey Memorial Hospital than it does for me to go all the way into Vancouver, because we have created that gridlock with the way the development has taken place. There are some wonderful models from around the world, and the Europeans have perfected this at developing communities, not only because it's good for the environment, but also because it's good for human beings. It's good for their mental health. It provides space where kids can play safely. It provides connections with your neighbors, that community feeling that we need.
I'll just very briefly say that if you're really into the policy on this, look up a document called the Livable Region Strategic Plan, because it was developed out of some futuristic work done in the late 1960s in Metro Vancouver, where we came up with the idea of the town center, where people didn't have to travel a long way to get to services or to work. If people live close to the things they need, then you're traveling less, you're polluting less, you're spending less time away from the things that you want to do. On a national basis, though, the federal government is making a big push to get broadband internet more available to small and remote communities across the country, because as we've seen in the pandemic, the availability of decent bandwidth is huge, you know, to hold the Zoom meetings, to take part in the economy or in social activities that are going on now because we can't get together all in the same place. So there's a lot of bits and pieces, but there is some history here, especially in Metro Vancouver, of really, really smart planning. And I think we've drifted away from that. So look up Livable Region Strategic Plan, because it still works.
Thank you. Moving on, our next question is from Jepin herself. So Jepin, go ahead.
My question is for Jinny Sims. So climate change is only a big idea in the BC curriculum in Science 7 with minimal reference to the role of Indigenous communities. How is the provincial government planning to expand on climate literacy into other grades, as well as incorporate into its classes the role that Indigenous communities are still playing today to protect this land?
Thank you very much for that question. And first of all, let me say that You know, years and years ago when climate change wasn't talked about as much as today, and we didn't see the urgency, I was very, very proud of the work that the Teachers Federation did in developing resources for the classroom that would augment the curriculum. And yes, it might be there only in one part of the curriculum, but earth science, as you know, has a major component in there as well. But for me, climate change is one of those things that needs to be infused in every part of the curriculum. Whether you're teaching English, whether you're teaching history, we can't have just a standalone course on climate change. It has to be infused into every single course that exists because it is that important. And so I'm a real believer in that. And the grade 9 now have a systems approach, you know, where you present it with an idea and then you explore that. And sustainability is a big issue in there. And I know that even my granddaughter, when she was in grade 6, brought a sustainable project home that she talked to me about as well. So yes, it does exist in pockets as curriculum, but to me, if I was teaching English right now, I would be picking up on some of the stories, either from the newspapers or finding some novels or finding some sort of data, even scientific reports, and discussing those with students, because I'm a real believer that the teaching we do needs to be bringing different things in together. So if you're doing short stories, there's some wonderful short stories out there that I've used in the past to teach us about climate change through stories. So I did one the other day on my story time. I've started to do a story time on a Tuesday night. I did one with we need more people, more purple people. And the reason behind that was it was about racism, how we've all different, but let's celebrate each other and we've got to accept each other in similar ways. Once again, a big shout out to the teachers, but also to the Ministry of Education and Clean BC, Minister Heyman, for the focus they're putting on developing resources so that it can be infused in the school curriculum.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to move on to audience questions. So these are going to be read by me and Chapin, but it's going to be questions that the members of Surrey are asking you guys. So we have a few that have already come in, so let's turn our attention to those. You can just send your questions through the chat and then we'll go from there. But the first question, I think Chapin has that one.
So this is a fairly big question, but fundamentally underlies all social justice and climate issues. Considering capitalism requires constant growth and puts profit before the planet and people, how can we meet the challenge of the climate crisis under this economic paradigm?
I can start. I think that, as I said previously, this pandemic, as horrible as it has been, and it's changed our lives, actually gives us a real pivotal point to take a look at our economies. And as my colleague mentioned earlier, trickle-down economics has been demonstrated to be a sort of a colossal failure. So how do we take a look at rebuilding, restarting our economy with the kind of lens where we value people, where we value services, where we value Mother Earth? And climate change is an integral part of that. So for me, we have this generation, all of us together, now have an amazing opportunity to do things differently. We've been doing things this way since before World War I, before World War II, and then of course with the Industrial Revolution that came along, and then with the neoliberal agenda. What we've seen with the neoliberal agenda, it divides, not only when it comes to looking after our climate, our planet, but it has divided. The gap between the rich and poor has got huge. And I would say the social injustices have increased. The isms are more defined now than ever, though they're not publicly talked about as much as we need to. So for me, this is a time for that big paradigm shift. I think the days for tinkering with what we have are gone. I think this is a wake-up call for us to say, okay, how do we rebuild so that those workers who are working in healthcare get the kind of recognition that they need in order to do that job? How do we look after our seniors differently? How do we look after our children differently? How do we do education differently for the future differently? And governments have power. And their power is that they get to set policies at different levels, but they also have the financial resources now to start some of that engineering that needs to happen if we are wanting the kind of world I heard people say they wanted. Our empathy and our pot banging, if it's forgotten after the pandemic and we go back to the same old, then we haven't learned very much. So let's be a group of people, both levels of government and individuals and the business community. And I want to do a shout out to the business community for the amazing way they stepped up during this pandemic and are going through very difficult times. Let's sit down together collaboratively. And I'm going to invite each and every one of you to go onto the BC website under COVID-19 restart plan. And please have your say, because we want you involved collaboratively in painting a picture and coming up with policies that will determine our future and my children and grandchildren's future.
All right, we do have, we're trying to answer everyone's questions, but if we don't get to your question today, guys, sorry about that. Our next question is from Annie. This was submitted previously in advance. So the question is, trees supply us with life-giving oxygen and our carbon sinks. Council has decided to take funds from the Green City Fund, which was established to pay for the cost of planting trees, to replace those cut down by development to make up for a forecasted budget shortfall. How can the Green City Fund be given statutory protection so that it cannot be used for anything other than its original purpose?
Chuckling anxiety. That's what I've been battling with for the last several weeks here. So ultimately, it comes down to the will of council. So the council can basically do whatever it wants. And if council has the will, well, first of all, the question is that, should the Green City Fund be touched for other uses? And the answer, of course, is no. I do not support that. And I know there's several of the other councillors that are of like mind. But ultimately, to protect it, that can, well, so this, it doesn't really have to be protected, because if council decided that they didn't want to touch the money, then they just wouldn't touch the money. But that's what they're choosing to do, is instead of going after, there's $25 million that's set aside for the transition, which is protected. So instead of going after that money, they're going after the Green City Fund. So yeah, so that's the first thing. So council is doing an intentional decision to make this happen. And if there was going to be an intentional decision to protect this in some manner, then they'd not have to come forth as a notice of motion or that sort of thing. Unfortunately, notice of motions these days are generally not allowed. That's unfortunate. But if a motion were to come forth in that manner, then that could be modified by council, and council could endorse such a change. So that has to go through there. But in order for council to be swayed one way or the other, it comes down to you folks. And you're listening to this right now. And I'm sure, because this is an environmental forum, I'm sure many of you are very, very strong in support of trees and not touching the Green City Fund. So we as a council need to hear from you. And we need to hear from you en masse. I'd be happy if several thousand of you contact us to let us know. But we can make that decision to protect it. We can approach the province to set aside, to give a higher level of protection. All those things can be done, but they're done at the will of the council. Right now, the council does not appear to have the will for that, but that could change. And so that's something I'm very hopeful for. But yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen. So hopefully we'll hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is for Ken Hardie. It was also submitted in advance. Will the federal government support federal funding for public transportation?
The answer short answer is yes, absolutely. There's two pieces of it though. Over a long period of time, the federal government, starting with Paul Martin, started dedicating a part of the federal fuel tax through the provinces to cities. And in Metro Vancouver, the deal is that all of that money goes to TransLink. There's a problem, and it's a problem that I've raised with the Prime Minister's office, and that is that federal money always is applied to capital. That is, you can use it to build a new facility, you can use it to buy buses or SkyTrain cars or whatever, but you can't use it to run them. So you have a situation that we have right now where TransLink's fare revenue has just cratered because of the pandemic. They don't want to go buy buses because they can't afford to run them if they buy them. So this is a situation where, with my background at TransLink, I've been grinding the Prime Minister's office to come up with basically a new deal for transit systems across the country where federal money can be used at least during the recovery period from the pandemic to keep the buses on the road.
I can comment, and I think that building public transit is the responsibility of all levels of government, and we all work together. And Surrey has been the neglected child over the last few decades, and so we do have serious issues, and I think we need to see huge sums of money infused into Surrey to bring us up to par with some of our surrounding neighbours.
So I have a comment on the transit issue. So my main comment is to do with the governance of the transit. I believe that the governance model is flawed. I believe that the Mayor's Council and the way that is run is as a flawed system, and it needs to be reworked. It needs to be done. I believe that the power for TransLink and the decision power needs to be brought back to the Metro Board. And that's there's too much power in the hands of too few people, and there's too much money that's been allocated to a couple of certain areas. And I've heard complaint after complaint from other municipalities how they're ignored, as well as areas of our city. So I believe that needs to be done. And at the 2050 transit plan, there it is, the Transport 2050, that was a common theme that kept coming up over and over, is the governance model for transit needs to be looked at. And I believe staff is starting to take a bit of a look at that now, but that is one of my main solutions, is to do away with this current governance model, and let's put the power back into the broad base of the board. And hopefully we'll have a more equitable use of the money, not just controlled by a small group of powerful individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is for Jinny Sims. Your government is currently conducting an old growth strategic review of logging in the province. And recently, a supporting independent report concluded the state of ancient forests in the province is abysmal, with only 400,000 hectares, or 3% left, that is capable of growing the monumental trees that once existed here. It is obvious we are down to the remnants of spectacular forests that once existed here. Will you support a moratorium on logging the remaining old growth forest trees and an expedited conversion to a more sustainable model that will allow the intrinsic values of our ancient forests to thrive and be enjoyed by future generations?
Thank you for that question. And I can tell you one of the big attractions for staying in BC was its geography, but also its spectacular trees. And having spent a lot of my early years when I was a lot younger, either hiking or kayaking, and getting into some of these beautiful areas like Qayqayt and off the west coast and up into HardieMLA, I really am fully committed to making sure that our forest policies are sustainable and that we respect the ancient growth. Now, I'm very proud of the work our government has done. One of the reasons I did decide to run politically, besides all the social justice issues, was that we were sending a lot of our raw resources overseas without getting value added for them. So we would see truckloads of logs just leaving the province, and the good paying jobs would be everywhere else, and yet we were losing our resources. So recently you've seen that the Premier has really focused in on how do we get value added, how do we use compressed wood, how do we start using wood to build structures as high as 11, 12 floors, and but also how do we make sure that our forestry work is sustainable, and because it is a major economic driver in the interior. But we've also been working very closely with our First Nations and Aboriginal communities to make sure that we respect the cultural as well as the forest land that exists there. We have to continue to do that. And this is ongoing work, a work in progress, but one I know that from the Premier down, the government is very, very committed to sustainable growth, but also to make sure that we retain our heritage.
Just very briefly, I'll just chime in. In the work that I did on the Fisheries and Oceans Standing Committee, we worked an awful lot on marine protected areas. But an aspect of that is the network capabilities of tying a marine protected area to land-based activities that are also being protected, because the two do work together, especially when you're talking about fish habitat. So it is something of interest, excuse me, to the federal government.
All right, great. And our next question is from Marjorie McKenzie, and her question is, as a newer resident of Surrey, about 5 years, I'm very concerned and wonder if the city council needs a complete redo. It's a very small council for such a large city, and the mayor seems very irresponsible. How can we possibly address green initiatives in the city when the mayor and council are not responsive? Peter aside.
I'm going to take a stab at that. So it's always good to review things. So I'm not going to comment on things that I'd like to comment on. But I think one thing that would be good to consider, and this is something we talked about during the campaign process, is a different type of system. And so award systems come up over and over in discussions. So perhaps that's something that we need to look at to be able. I'm not sure what version or what model of award system, but I think that's something that is a really interesting idea. Then hopefully we'd have to be able to get the support of the provincial government on that, and council would have to endorse that. But that is something that would be a very powerful thing to do. And as far as it's also been suggested to perhaps add more councillors, well, maybe not that. One thing I think would be good to do is lots of young people watching. I would encourage you to get involved. And hopefully at the next election, I could do with some help. I really could. And I'd love to have a young person being able to help out with the situation of trying to work and save the environment. And there's enough of you there. And some of you must be going into political sciences, that sort of thing. So those are a couple things that I think would be good. Another one as well is that accountability. We need to be accountable. And if I don't do a good job, vote me off. I'm trying to do my best, but that's the way it should be. And federally and provincially, there's a recall mechanism. So if something goes really bad, then there could be a recall, but there is no recall at a municipal level. So that's another thing I'd love to see. I'd love to see the award system looked at. I'd love to see the recall mechanism put in place. And I don't have any concerns with that. If I'm doing a bad job, and then, if I'm not listening to people, then there should be something in place to pull me out or anybody out. And that's something so I think those three things would be really, really good to overhaul our municipal system, is to have look at award system and a municipal recall, and to have youth involved and to have youth run for office. Thank you.
Well, we have Surrey, that parts of Surrey that are sort of, you feel you're moving into 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different worlds. Very, very different. I look at Newton, the area where I was an MP before, and now part of Newton is in my new riding as well. and often feel so neglected down here because of the lack of investment in infrastructure, whether it was schools in the past, not now, and also for public transit, and looking at facilities, recreational facilities as well. And then you've got other parts of the city that is really well served. So for me, I think what we need to do is start addressing some of those inequities, whether it's the current council or a new council. But one of the things that I do want to say, and I believe this from the bottom of my heart, whether it's the teaching profession, whether it's your members of parliament, or whether it's your city council or your MLAs, they need to reflect the diversity of the population that lives in those communities. Because I don't mean diversity in cultural terms or ethnic terms, but I mean diversity for different perspectives on a council as well. And I'm sure that exists with the current council. But I now want to focus more in on the ethnic diversity that we need to see as well. Our children, if they come from, let's say, Nigeria, and we have a large population here, they want to see themselves in some levels of the city structure, some levels of government as well, in the same way for the South Asian community, for the Filipino community as well. And so gender is always important to me. Our city council should also be balanced as far as gender goes. But really, we need to start paying a little bit more attention to the decision makers, because if we're going to bring about systemic change, then we've got to have seats at the table where decisions are made.
Thank you. So this is our second last question that we'll just spend a couple minutes on because we are close to 7:30. So this one comes from Christopher. Today, the provincial government has started to roll back its ban on evictions. Mr. Hardie correctly pointed to developers' stranglehold on municipal politics. So what further plans do the three levels of government have to build actually affordable, publicly owned social housing and cut the developers and their big profits out?
Thank you very much for that question again. And it's a very important one, because when you talk about basic needs, human needs, it is the need for food, it is the need for shelter. And housing has become so expensive in British Columbia that I would say that even if you earn $100,000 a year, it's very, very difficult for you to qualify for a mortgage to buy a townhouse, never mind buying a house. And I take it back to when I first qualified as a teacher. I bought a house straight away because I qualified for a mortgage and the house prices were reasonable. Today, teachers, police officers, nurses, so many people, people who work in grocery stores, that's no longer a dream for them. So many of them are living in rental homes. I'm not saying there's anything bad in living in rental homes, but those rent prices have gone up. So I'm proud of the work that our government has done. We've spent billions, invested billions into developing not only supportive housing for getting people off the streets, with multi-level services available to help them to tackle their many addictions and mental health issues, but also the affordable housing that is being built around, but also housing aimed at the middle income families who can't qualify at the moment. And it was a shock for me. I'm an MLA, and you would think that I get paid fairly well. And but you can check my paycheck, it's on the website. But I would find it hard to qualify for a mortgage to buy a house today. I would find it hard. And that to me is just not the way it's supposed to be. Over the last 16 years, the previous government allowed money laundering and many other things. And, as we've said, developer frenzies to, and big money was made by many. And by the way, not all developers are bad people. We have good developers who do social housing, who are really caring about the kind of structures that go up. But it's the people who give them permission to build some of the structures that we need to start thinking about the focus on affordable housing. And under Minister Robinson, billions of dollars have been allocated over the next 10 years. And a lot of that investment is going out of the doors as we speak to accelerate building more homes. And that happens all over the province, by the way, not just here. I've been at shovels in the ground, so to speak, in different parts of the province for different housing projects. And it would be great to have the federal government back into that system as well.
Oh, but we are. Yeah. we are. We're the first time in 20 years the federal government is back into housing, social housing, especially affordable housing. We even actually started buying up hotels to provide, more rental accommodation in communities. And the way the pandemic has treated the hospitality industry, there may be more than a few hotels available in the not too distant future. So that's just something to keep your eye on.
Thank you. So I was trying to madly scribble down the original question, so I wasn't able to do that. So let's housing discussion. So I'm going to just kind of flow with that. So I've just got a few ideas to just bounce off you. And so a couple of things is that one of the main issues that we're having, especially in this area down City Hall and in Guildford, and now we're experiencing it in Newton, we're getting there, and also Cloverdale, is dealing with our unhoused residents and how that's affecting the rest of our society. And I've seen reports from the BAAs on how when you actually elevate and you take care of the homeless or the unhoused people or the poor, that it actually works its way through society, and it looks after, it takes care of businesses. It's more profitable for a society to look after the poor type people than versus ignoring them, which I feel we're doing a lot of times. So just a few ideas. I'm not saying these are the idea or the fantastic idea, just something to get a discussion going. Because that's the main thing. Is I'm not putting myself forth as an expert. But here are some ideas. Get the discussion going. Things I've heard from other people, and once the discussion is going, then it can lead to some good ideas at the end. But anyway, something along the lines of the nonprofits. We need to help these organizations out, and something about reducing their fees, removing their fees, giving them some special deals, some special status, so that when they are trying to build housing for the people that can only afford $400 or $500 a month, they shouldn't have an extra burden of hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on top of that. So that might be something to look at. Also a mixture. If we're going and we're having large developments, we're having units of 700 units or hundreds of units going in, have a certain percentage. I always remember the Coyote Creek situation where they were going to put those in, and they were going to put 5% of the Coyote Creek was going to be rental housing or affordable housing, and they upped it to 10. Well, something along those lines. So that every development going forth has a percentage of a rental housing component to their unit. So that would be something to consider. Also, a priority on low-income housing. Again, we're having people sleeping in doorways. That's not good for anybody. It's not good for the people. It's not good for the businesses. And if we can take care of these people, if we can provide something for them, I know that I've talked to people in the senior levels of government, and there's money available. I don't feel we're doing enough as a city. I think we can do more. I know Councillor Locke is doing all that she can. We keep encountering roadblocks, but if we were to make this as a council a priority, that we want to be able to take care of the low-income people and the people that are on the streets, that's something that would be good. Also, the developers. We want the developers to be profitable. We want them to come into the city. We want them to build. They are the core of building our city up. Something along the lines of a fee deferral, maybe to the permitting process, and defer their fees until the end of it. We'll get the money eventually, but that'll help them out to be able to build their businesses and build their structures. So those are just a couple of ideas, but there you go. So I thought I'd share those with you.
And our last question for all three of you today actually is, just find it. Okay, for each representative, what is the top lesson learned from the government's response to COVID that you can carry over to the climate crisis?
I'll go first for a change. So the things that I've learned, and as a government official and as an individual from this whole situation, is how quickly things can change. Well, what we think is normal can just change in a matter of weeks, and our whole lives can be turned upside down. So that's happened obviously with COVID, but I'm going to stretch out a bit further with the environment. And so that's something that's really made a major impact on me. And I've heard stories, as I'm sure you have, about things such as, in Venice, the fish are coming back, the water's cleared, and you can see the fish happening there. I've heard stories like, people could see the Himalayas for the first time, or the holes are closing up and the skies are becoming bluer. So this is a good sign to us. I know over the last year, it was kind of gloom and doom that, we only have 12 years left and the planet's going to be destroyed. All these things. Well, there is hope. And so that's the one thing that's come really powerful to me, that the world for a moment just took a breath and stepped back, and the world recovered, and the world took a breath and it cleaned itself up. So we can do this. If there's political will to step forth, and if there's political pressure from people like you, we can do this. We can make the change. We need to move away from fossil fuels. We need to stop spending billions of dollars, in my opinion, on useless projects like the pipeline. We need to be able to take and invest those resources into green economies and shift. And we need to get this momentum going. We've got provincial elections coming up. We need people that are green-minded and young and full of energy to run for provincial office. We've got a municipal election coming up in a few years, the same thing. So we can do this. We can turn this around. Let's take the momentum that we have and let's run with it, and let's actually turn this thing around. We can do it.
Well, the one thing I learned during this pandemic is the human ingenuity and our resilience. And the overall message is that we are all in this together. I know it's a hashtag, and it's one that I use all the time. But if we apply that to the challenges that are facing us when it comes to climate change and when it comes to social justice issues, we are all in this together. And then we support each other and we're kind to each other, we're going to move forward. And if our governments, as we're looking at rebuilding, the restarting, whichever terminology you want to use, the economies, we put people front and center. If you put people front and center and you keep the adage that we are all in this together, that the pandemic did not differentiate between the color of your skin. It didn't ask you what your socioeconomic was for you to be impacted by the COVID. Nor will climate change, nor does many other things that we're faced with. So for me, what we need to do is make sure that we always remember we are in this together. So if you have lots of money and you live in a huge house, you cannot feel that you do not have a responsibility towards climate change. Because when the climate changes, believe me, it's going to impact each and every one of us. So that's the one takeaway for me, and the one that I will repeat over and over again. We are in this together, so let's work together to find solutions.
Well, I reserved the last one for myself, I guess. We've gone through a better part of 30 years where the mantra has been small government, deregulate, cut taxes, and all that served to do is to make a small number of people rather largely rich. There's a handful of families, maybe 25, that have more wealth than the rest of Canadians put together. And that's an injustice. We talk about justice reform when it talks, when we talk about the police and all of that. We need injustice reform in this country and in fact, in a lot of nations. So government has a role. Now, do we have to go back to big government like we had in, the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even into the 60s? Well, maybe, because those were very, very prosperous times, especially the 60s, which all of you are far too young to remember. that was an amazing time. And back in those days, people, the wealthy, were paying 80% in taxes, and they were still living well. And that's because government was very active in building the country. So government has a role, but it depends on the government that you choose. Stephen Crozier, in one of his chat comments, made an excellent point. You know, what happens if in the next provincial election or the next federal election, we elect a government that believes that balancing the budget is more important than people, that austerity is the way to go? Well, if we do that, then we're going to be in Suffer City for a very, very long time. So what do you do about it? Well, you get involved. You do pick up the piece of trash on the street. You do pay attention to what goes on in your city council, in your province, and your federal government. And you do talk to people like the three of us when you see things that aren't right. We need new vision. I'm going to go back at Stephen over that crack about the pipeline, because his crack about the pipeline was based on the paradigm that petrol is used for energy. Today, using compounds from petrochemicals, you can 3D print a house in a couple of days. Think of what that might mean to the housing situation up north. Think of the opportunities that is laid out in front of us when you look at that sector, that industry, through different eyes. It's no accident that the biggest proponents and the people investing the most in alternate energy technology are the big oil companies, because they can see that the gravy train for them is coming to an end. So, you know, let's be expansive. Let's follow up on some of the questions that were asked here today. I loved a comment, and I forget exactly who said it first, but Ted Kennedy, who's the brother of John Kennedy, former American president, and brother of Bobby Kennedy, said something at Bobby Kennedy's funeral that really represented what he stood for, and one of the reasons why I ran in the first place. And it's very simply this: some people see the world as it is and say, why? I see the world as it could be and say, why not? Okay, you're the why not gang. Get involved, plug in and stay plugged in, because hey, it's not going to be too long before you're running the place, so you better be ready.
I just want to say a big thank you to Stephen, Jinny, and Ken for their time and thoughtful answers, as well as everyone from the community who attended to listen or ask a question. Again, sorry if we weren't able to get to yours. And we especially want to thank everyone for staying past 7:30. We really appreciate it. Thank you for caring about the COVID-19 recovery and our futures, green and just.